She's not on the list because she wasn't there in any way that counts. Colonel Denham Roscoe said it into an open microphone at the Fort Aubrey parade ground. 300 people in folding chairs under a white canvas awning, and he did not lower his voice when he said it. He had just finished reading 18 names off a laminated card. 18 men who had held the Caceri crossing for 9 hours. He read them slowly, the way a man reads when he believes the reading itself is the honor. And when a warrant officer in the second row leaned forward and said something quiet, a name, one name, not on the card, Roscoe leaned into the microphone and answered him loud enough for the back rows to hear. Staff Sergeant Iridi Naukam sat in the 9th row, 4th chair, hands folded loosely in her lap, and did not move. She did not flinch. She did not look up. The woman beside her turned to see how she would take it, and there was nothing to see. Her breathing did not change. Her jaw didn't set. She watched a heat shimmer come off the packed dirt beyond the awning, and she counted it the way she counted everything, the way the air stacked and bent over hot ground, how much it would push around at 400 meters, at 6, at 9. 30 seconds passed. She was still. The woman beside her, Corporal Anche Deleu, would tell people afterward that the stillness was the thing that scared her. Not anger. Stillness like a held breath. Deleu had been at the crossing. Deleu had seen what Iridi Naukam did there, and she had not understood 1/10 of it while it was happening. What Roscoe did not know, sitting under that canvas with his laminated card, was that in 11 days he would say Naukam's name into a radio handset with his voice cracking in front of 9 of his own men, and he would say it twice because the first time it came out wrong. She did not yet know it either, but she had already noticed the way the wind came off the northern ridge every afternoon at 1500, and she had already written the number down. If you're listening to this while you're driving or cooking or halfway through a workout, stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't, and drop the name of your city in the comments because I want to see how far this story travels. And stay to the end, because there's a moment about 30 minutes from now where a man who spent 8 months pretending she didn't exist has to say her name out loud on an open channel with everyone listening, and he can't get it out the first time. That's the part people write me about. 6 weeks earlier, Fort Aubrey was a scatter of prefabs and Hesco walls on a shelf of high desert where the ground was the color of old bone and nothing grew above knee height. The heat came up through boot soles by 9 in the morning. Dust got into the rifle actions, into food, into the seams of eyelids. At night the temperature dropped 40 degrees, and men who had sweated through their shirts at noon shivered in their bags at 2. The whole valley was a bowl of loose scree and wind-cut rock, and the wind moved through it in patterns that most people experienced as annoyance, and that Iridi Naukam experienced as information. She was 5'3". She weighed 118 pounds. When she carried her rifle case across the compound, the case looked like it should have been carrying her. She had learned to shoot in a place nobody at Aubrey would have guessed. Not from a grandfather, not from a dead man with a worn keepsake. She had learned it at 19, in the flat gray light of a range outside Rilova, from a woman named Sergeant Major Petronella Ashwood Keir, who was 51 years old, still alive, still teaching, and who had told Iridi in their first week together that she had bad habits and a bad attitude and one good eye for wind, and that the third thing was the only thing worth keeping. Ashwood Keir did not teach stillness. She taught aggression. She taught that a shot was a decision you made and then committed to like a punch you throw from the hip, and that hesitation killed more shooters than Wind ever had. She made Iridi run 400 meters uphill and shoot with her heart at 180. She made her shoot with a bad shoulder, in rain, with a stopwatch running and a whistle blowing in her ear. She told her once, flat, no philosophy in it at all, take the shot you have, not the one you want. Iridi had thought it was a cliché for 2 years. Then in her 3rd year, she understood it was a warning about ego, and she had never once forgotten it. Ashwood Keir was wrong about one thing, and Iridi knew it and never said it. Ashwood Keir believed you could not teach patience. Iridi had taught it to herself, alone, on the long hides, and it had become the half of her the old woman never saw. There was no keepsake. There was a habit. Before a hard shot, she pressed her tongue flat to the roof of her mouth and let the air out through her nose in one slow line, the way she had been taught to do while running uphill with a whistle screaming. It was not sentimental. It just worked. Her file said Sniper School Honor Graduate. Her file said 406 confirmed cold bore firsts. Nobody at Fort Aubrey read files. What they saw was a small, quiet woman who ate alone and did not laugh at jokes. Sergeant First Class Denham Roscoe. He was not a colonel yet. That came later, and it came fast. Ran the marksmanship cell at Aubrey, and Roscoe was good. That was the thing people missed about him. He was a genuinely excellent shooter, a man who could call his own wind to a quarter minute, and his contempt was not stupidity. It was a choice. He had decided what a shooter looked like a long time ago, and he was not interested in revising it. "You're on ammo detail," he told her the first week, in front of the whole cell. "Somebody's got to count boxes." "Yes, Sergeant." "That's it? That's the whole objection?" Iridi looked at him for a second and a half. "Yes, Sergeant." He laughed, and 4 men laughed with him because he was laughing. The second scene was the range, and it was worse because it was quieter. Roscoe ran a qualification shoot, and he simply did not put her on the firing line. Not a word about it. The roster went up on the plywood board, and her name was not on it, and when she stood there reading it, he walked past behind her and said, not unkindly, which was the cruelest part, "Save you the embarrassment." The third scene was the mess hall, and it was where Corporal Ansha Delot got hers. Delot was 26, a former surveyor, built like a fence post, and about as expressive. She had come to Aubrey as a spotter and been assigned to inventory instead. "You two should team up," Roscoe said, passing their table with a tray. "You can count boxes together." Delot opened her mouth. Iridi touched 2 fingers to the table, once. Delot closed her mouth. Later, outside, in the cold, Delot said, "Why?" "Because he wants the argument," Iridi said. "It's the only fight he can win." That was the longest sentence Delot heard her say for 3 weeks. They found each other over ground, not over feelings. Delot had spent 4 years mapping terrain for a mining consortium and could read a slope the way other people read a face. Iridi found her one evening on the North Berm with a laser rangefinder and a notebook, ranging rocks nobody cared about, and stood beside her without saying anything for 11 minutes. Then Delot said, "That outcrop, 840. 836, Iridi said. Delot shot it again. 836. They looked at each other. Neither smiled. It was the beginning of something anyway. The witness was a fuel handler, named Private Obadi Kranstetter, 19, from a farm town, who had the job of topping off generators at the far end of the compound, and therefore walked past the disused West Berm every evening at dusk. Every evening he saw the same thing. The small sergeant lying prone in the scree, with no rifle at all, just a spotting scope and a notebook, writing numbers. He asked her about it once. "What are you shooting at, Sergeant?" "There's nothing out there." "Air," she said. He thought she was making fun of him. He told 2 friends she was strange, but he kept noticing, because that was what Cranstetter did. He noticed things and did not know what they meant. He noticed she wrote a number every day at exactly 1500 hours. He noticed she wrote a second number when the light went orange. He noticed that after 3 weeks, she stopped needing the scope for the 1500 number and just wrote it from the feel of the air on the back of her neck. He did not understand a single thing he was looking at. He was, at that moment, the only person on Fort Aubrey who was looking. The crisis came on a Tuesday at 14:08, and it came the way they always come, in the middle of something stupid. Iridi was signing for a pallet of 5.56 with a clipboard against her thigh when the base alarm went and did not stop. The Caceri crossing was a 2-lane concrete bridge over a dry wash 41 kilometers northeast, and it was held by a rifle platoon under a lieutenant named Ovidiu Brankmar, and at 14:01 that platoon had driven into the middle of a prepared ambush. 8 fighting positions on the high ground north of the wash, 2 heavy machine guns in defilade, a mortar tube somewhere in the folds behind. Brankmar's men were pinned in the culvert and along the concrete abutment and could not lift their heads, and their vehicles were burning on the bridge deck, and the enemy was working down the slope toward them in bounds. The Tactical Operations Center at Aubrey filled with noise. Colonel, then Major, Halvard Beckman Ose stood at the map board with a headset half on and listened to Brankmar's voice come apart over the net. There was no air. Weather had grounded Rotary Wing to the west. Quick Reaction Force was 90 minutes out over Bad Road. "I need overwatch on that north ridge," Beckman Ose said. "I need it in 40 minutes, and I need it to be one person who can get up there without being seen." Roscoe said, "I'll take Ferrant and Odiwe. 3 of you on that spur in daylight? They'll see you at 2 kilometers. Then who?" Beckman Ose was quiet for a moment. He had signed a personnel roster 8 months ago. He had signed it and not read it, and he had heard the way Roscoe talked in the mess hall, and he had said nothing, because saying something would have cost him a difficult conversation with a man he needed. He went to the file cabinet himself. He pulled the folder. He read for 11 seconds. "Get me now come," he said. Roscoe said, "Sir, I read her file," Beckman Ose said, "which is more than I did 8 months ago. That's on me." He did not look up. "Get her." She came in with dust on her sleeves and the clipboard still in her hand. She set it on the map table. She looked at the north ridge for 4 seconds. 2 hours to walk it, she said. 40 minutes if I take the wash and accept being seen for the last 800 meters. "Can you shoot from the wash?" "No, I need the spur." She put one finger on a contour. "This shelf, it's got a rock lip. I can get behind it." "How long to be effective from the moment you're set?" "I'm effective when I'm set." Beckman Ose looked at her a second longer than he needed to. "Take a spotter." "Deleu." Roscoe made a sound. Nobody acknowledged it. They went out in a stripped-down utility truck, with Deleu driving and Iridi in the back, checking the rifle she had not been allowed to fire, on a range in 8 months. 600 rounds of 5.56 in the compound, and she had counted every box of it and never put one downrange in front of them. And the rifle in her hands was a .300 Norma, with a suppressor and a scope she had zeroed at 2 in the morning on a berm nobody watched. They drove 19 kilometers on road and 12 in a wash where the truck bottomed out twice and then they ran, and Delot, who was fitter, was the one gasping when they crested the last of the scree. The first transmission came at 14:51. Everyone in the TOC had spent 8 months hearing Iridi Naukam described as the ammo counter. Then the net clicked, and a voice came through it that nobody recognized as hers because it was so completely without stress. Aubrey, this is Overwatch. I'm set on the spur. I have 8 fighting positions on the north face, 2 crew served, 1 in defilade behind the second rock nose. I have movement in the wash at the friendly right. Brankmar's people are alive in the culvert. I'm going to start on the left-hand gun. Beckman Osias closed his eyes for half a second. In the corner, Denham Roscoe stood very still and said nothing at all. She started on the left-hand gun. The first round left at 14:52, and the gunner did not get up. The assistant swung the traverse, and she fired again, and he did not get up either. That was 2, and the suppressed report was a flat cough that the men in the culvert 400 meters below never even heard over their own fire. 2, Delot said. She had the spotting scope and a notebook, and she started a column. The enemy did not know where it came from for 90 seconds. That was the gift, and Iridi spent it the way Ashwood Keir had taught her to spend a gift, which was fast and without gratitude. She worked left to right along the fighting positions because they were in a line, and a line is a mistake, and she took 4 men in the next 50 seconds while they were still looking down at the culvert. 6, Delot said. Then the second crew-served gun, the one in defilade behind the rock nose, stopped firing at the culvert and swung north. They had found her. It had taken them 2 minutes. The first burst came in high and long, and Iridi heard the rounds go over as a sound like fabric tearing overhead, 3 feet up, and she did not move, because moving is how you die. She watched the dust plume come off the rock 40 meters left of her, and knew he was walking it, that he had not seen her, that he had seen the general place a shot could come from, and was going to hose the whole shelf and let luck do the work. The second burst was closer. She felt grit hit the side of her face, and it stung like a handful of sand thrown hard. Her heart was at 140. She pressed her tongue flat to the roof of her mouth and let the air out through her nose in one slow line. The gun was in defilade. She could see the muzzle blast lifting dust over the rock nose, but she could not see the gun or the man behind it. She could see, though, a gap, a hand's width of daylight between the rock nose and the shoulder of the hill. And every time the gunner leaned to traverse right, something crossed that gap. Not a body, a shoulder and the top of a helmet, for less than half a second. Third burst. Rounds hit the lip of her rock, and something opened a 2-inch line across the back of her left hand, and she registered it as heat, not pain, and did not look at it. "He's walking it right to left now," Delot said, and her voice had gone thin. "Sergeant, he's going to be on us in 6 seconds. Watch the gap." "What gap?" "Under the nose. Tell me when the helmet crosses." Delot found it. Delot was a surveyor. She found the geometry in 1 second flat. "Crossing, now." 410 meters. A target visible for 4/10 of a second in a slot the width of a hand. And Iridi Naukam did not wait for a second look, because there was not going to be one. She fired into the gap ahead of the movement. The gun stopped. The silence afterward was so total that Delot heard her own blood. 7, Delot said. They shifted. 90 meters right along the shelf, crawling with the rifle cradled across her forearms. And the whole time the mortar was working somewhere behind the ridge, and they could hear it. The hollow thump of the tube, then the long wait, then the crack down in the wash where it was landing among Brankmar's people. "Aubrey, Overwatch. I need the mortar. I can't see it. We can't see it either. Then I'll find it. She found it by sound. 3 tubes worth of thumps, and she had a bearing off the echo, and a rough range off the flight time. And she put 4 rounds into a fold of ground she could not see into. And on the 4th the thumping stopped, and it did not start again. 8 through 11, Delos said. Maybe. I can't confirm. Then don't. Down in the culvert, Lieutenant Ovidiu Brankmar was screaming into a handset that nobody at Aubrey could hear over the interference, and 11 of his men were now able to shoot back for the first time in 50 minutes. The enemy did what competent people do when a position is being taken apart from above. They stopped defending it. 14 fighters came off the reverse slope in 2 groups and moved to flank the spur, up a chute of loose scree to Iridi's east, and they moved well, bounding, one group covering, using dead ground. The first she knew of it was Delos saying, "East, east, 40 meters, and moving." 40 meters is not a sniper's problem. 40 meters is a knife fight. Iridi rolled off the rifle and came up with a carbine she had not touched since the truck, and the sound of the fight changed entirely. The suppressed .300 had been a series of coughs, patient and spaced, and now the shelf filled with the hard, flat cracking of unsuppressed 5.56 bouncing off rock walls, doubling and tripling in the echo. 3 of them came over the lip at once. She shot the first at 11 meters, and the second at 9, and the third grabbed the barrel of her carbine with his bare hand. He was a foot taller than her, and 80 pounds heavier. He pulled, and she let him have it, let the weapon go entirely, and used the half-second his own strength gave him to draw the sidearm off her chest and put 2 rounds into him at contact distance. He fell across her legs. She could not get out from under him. She heard boots on the scree above. "Delos, left side, now." Delos had never fired at a human being. Delos fired 11 rounds in 3 seconds and hit 2 men and drove the rest back off the lip. And then she got her hands under the dead man's shoulders and hauled him off Iridi's legs, and she was crying while she did it, and her hands were completely steady. 15, Delos said, and then threw up and then picked up the spotting scope again. That was the moment Iridi Naukam decided she would follow Ansha Delos anywhere. The rest of the flank broke on the chute. Iridi retrieved the carbine and took 4 more in the scree as they fell back, and then went back on the .300 and took 2 more on the reverse slope at 611 meters. And then the north ridge was quiet. 21, Delos said. Confirmed, not counting the mortar. Aubrey, overwatch. North face is clear. Send the QRF up the wash, not the road. At 16:02, the shooting stopped entirely. Beckman Osei tried Brankmar on the net. Nothing. He tried again and got the flat hiss of an open channel with nobody on the other end of it. The TOC had gone completely silent. 40 people, nobody moving, listening to a sound like wind in a pipe. He said the call sign a 3rd time, and there was still nothing. And in that stretch of nothing, every person in that room built the same picture in their head, and none of them said it out loud. Then, Aubrey, this is Caceri 2. Caceri 6 is down but breathing. We have 4 urgent surgical. We need somebody who knows what they're doing. We've got a guy. Iridi was already off the spur. She came down 800 meters of scree in under 4 minutes, half of it sliding, and she came into the culvert with the rifle across her back and dust turning her into something the color of the ground, and 11 men who had never heard of her watched her walk in. The one they meant was a staff sergeant named Wilhelmus Trag, 38 years old. a squad leader with 16 years in, and he was gray and sweating and going somewhere far away behind his eyes. A fragment had gone into him, under the plate on the left side, and he was bleeding inside where nobody could reach it, and the two medics were both working on other men. Iridi knelt in the dirt beside him. She put her hands on him, the same hands still gritted with rock dust that had put around through a hand's width of daylight at 410 meters. And she found where the pressure was wrong, and she got a needle into his chest wall and let the trapped air out, and she heard his breathing change. "You a medic?" someone said. "No." She was not. She had spent 2 years as a range safety NCO in a place with no hospital inside 90 minutes, and she had learned this, the way she learned everything, by deciding it was necessary. Treggie's hand came up and closed on her sleeve. His grip was terrible. His eyes came back from wherever they had gone and found her face. "Am I dying?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. Iridi did not tell him it would be all right. She did not tell him to hang in there. "You're not," she said. "You're going home." "My wife," his breath caught. "We're supposed to get the boat out in September. She's been paying on it for 2 years. It's this ugly little—" "September," Iridi said. "Yes. You don't know that." "I do." She got her forearm under his shoulders and turned him 3 degrees, and his breathing eased another notch. She put her mouth close to his ear so that only he could hear it. "I've got you. You're going to be on that boat." He believed her. That was the thing nobody could explain afterward. That a man who had been leaving believed a stranger who weighed 118 pounds and stopped leaving. The medevac came in at 17:10 when the weather lifted enough to fly. 4 urgent surgical, 11 walking wounded, nobody dead who had been alive at 16:02. Iridi stood in the rotor wash with her sleeve stiff and dark, down one arm from a hand she still had not looked at, and watched the bird lift. It was over. Everyone in the culvert believed it was over. At 17:47 the net came alive again, and it was a voice from a checkpoint 11 kilometers west. And the voice was Denham Roscoe's. He had taken a 4-vehicle element out at 16:20 to secure the far side of the crossing while the QRF worked the near side, and he had done it correctly and by the book. And at 17:39 the lead vehicle had put a wheel on a pressure plate on the approach ramp of the Sarnac overpass, a 200-meter concrete span that carried the only hardball road back to Aubrey over a 60-foot drop into the wash. The blast did not kill anyone. It did something worse. It knocked the lead vehicle onto its side across the span and dropped a section of guardrail. And, more importantly, it woke up the men who had emplaced it, 30 or more, on both flanks of the western approach, in prepared positions, who had been waiting 8 days for exactly this. Roscoe's element was strung out on a 200-meter bridge, with a burning vehicle at the front and no room to turn around, and a 60-foot drop on both sides. 9 men, 4 of them already hurt, dragging the wounded into the lee of the flipped vehicle. And there was one more thing, and it was the thing that made it impossible. The enemy had wired the span itself. Not with a plate this time, with a real charge. 40 kilos of homemade explosives strapped to the 3rd pier, prepped a week earlier, and left dormant, with a command wire running 400 meters west into a rock cleft where a man with a hand generator sat and waited for exactly enough Americans to be standing on the deck. Beckman Ose got all of it in 90 seconds from a drone feed that had come on station at 17:51 and would be off station in 11 minutes for fuel. "He's going to blow the bridge with our people on it," Beckman Ose said. "Who's closest?" "Overwatch," Delos said on the net. "We're 4 kilometers east. Give us 20 minutes. "You don't have 20 minutes. "Then we'll take 11. They took 13. They came up the eastern shoulder of the wash on foot and got onto a shale bench 300 meters southeast of the bridge's western abutment. And by then the drone was gone, and the light was going gold and long. And Iridi, now calm, looked through her scope and saw the problem. The command wire ran west from the third pier, across open ground, into a cleft in the rock, a vertical crack in a shelf of sandstone, 2 feet wide, and the man with the generator was down inside it. Not visible, not remotely visible. She could see the wire disappearing into the crack, and she could see nothing else. He was under an overhang, in shadow, 540 meters away, and there was no angle from the bench, and there was no angle from anywhere on that side of the wash, and by the time she found an angle, he would have twisted the handle. "I can't reach him," she said. "Sergeant, there's no line. He's in a hole." And that was when the call came. The channel opened, and there was 3 full seconds of nothing on it. 3 seconds of an open mic, and a man breathing into it. Everybody in the TOC heard those 3 seconds. Everybody on the net heard them. Beckmanose looked at the speaker box. Then Roscoe's voice, and it was wrong. It was pitched too high, and it broke in the middle. "Overwatch, this is Rampart 6. I have 9 men on this deck. 4 are hurt. We can't move, and we can't get off, and they've got the bridge wired. We can see it on the pier." A pause. Then, and this was the part that 11 men on that bridge heard and never forgot. "Now come." It came out wrong. It came out cracked, like something in his throat had folded. He said it again, and the second time it was steady, and it cost him everything he had. "Nowcome, I need you, please." On the shale bench, 300 meters away, Iridi keyed the handset once and said, "Hold your position, Rampart. Don't move onto the open span." That was all. But Delot was looking at her and saw her hand shake once, exactly once, and then stop. "There's no shot," Delot said quietly. "Sergeant, there's no shot at him." "No. So what are we—" "Look at the wire." Delot looked at the wire. And Delot, who had spent 4 years reading ground for a mining company, who understood angles and spans and how a thing is anchored, saw what Iridi had not yet let herself believe. The command wire did not run flat. It could not, because 60 meters of the ground between the pier and the cleft was a slab of broken shale that nobody could bury a wire in. So they had strung it. It ran up over a rusted section of old guardrail post at the lip of the wash, a single strand of copper pulled taut across 11 meters of open air, and it hung there in the gold light 3 feet above the rock, sagging maybe a hand's width in the middle, and it was moving. Not much, but the wind came off the northern ridge in the late afternoon. The wind, Iridi had written a number for every day at 1,500 hours for 3 weeks, on a berm where a fuel handler thought she was shooting at nothing, and it was pushing the strand in a slow lateral drift. "That's a wire," Delot said. "That's a 2-millimeter wire at 500 meters, and it's moving." 522. "Sergeant, that's not a shot. That's a coin flip." "It's not." Iridi settled behind the rifle. "You're going to tell me when it's still." "It's never still." "It is. Watch it." Iridi's voice didn't rise at all. "It's not drifting randomly. It's swinging. Everything on a span swings on a period. You know that better than I do. Find me the top of the arc." And there it was. The thing Iridi could not do, because she was on the glass and could not watch the whole strand at once. Delot put the spotting scope on the wire and counted, out loud, and her voice found a rhythm it had not had all day. "West, west, hold, east," she said. "That's the top. That's about 2.5 seconds at the west end, where it stops before it comes back. How long is the stop? Half a second, maybe less. Which end? West. The west end of the swing is longer. There's a rock throwing the wind up. It hangs there. Iridi ran the numbers in her head and did not write anything down. 522 meters. A copper strand 2 millimeters thick. A target that was not a target at all. A line of metal against a background of the same colored rock, in light that was going orange and flattening every edge she needed. She could not see the wire in the scope as a wire. She could see it as a place where the texture of the rock behind it broke. And a miss did nothing. A miss into the shale would tell the man in the cleft exactly what was happening, and he would twist the handle, and 9 men and a 200-meter concrete span would come down into the wash together. 1 round. That was the whole engagement. 1 round or nothing. Down on the bridge, Roscoe had his men behind the flipped vehicle, and he was watching the third pier through a pair of binoculars with his hands not entirely steady, and he could see the charge on it, and he was doing arithmetic about how long a man takes to decide. "Rampart, overwatch," Iridi said. "Do not move. Do not fire west." "Understood. Whatever happens in the next minute, do not move." On the bench, she pressed her tongue flat to the roof of her mouth and let the air out through her nose in one slow line. Her pulse came down. Her hands went still in the way they went still. Not tension leaving, but everything unnecessary switching off. Take the shot you have, not the one you want. She had wanted the man in the cleft. She was never going to get the man in the cleft. She had the wire. "West," Deleuze said. "West, hold." Iridi did not fire. "Sergeant," again. "West, west, hold." She did not fire. Deleuze's breath came apart. "What are you doing?" "Timing your voice," Iridi said. "You're calling it a quarter second early. That's fine. I just needed to know." The third arc. The wind came off the northern ridge exactly the way it had come off it at 1500 hours every day for 3 weeks, and it pushed the strand west, and the strand slowed and hung. "West, hold!" She fired. For 1 full second, nothing in the world changed. The report rolled down the wash and came back off the far wall. The strand hung in the gold light. Deleuze had the scope on it and could not tell. And then the wire fell. It came down in 2 lazy directions at once, the western half whipping back toward the guardrail post, the eastern half sagging down onto the shale, and it lay there dead in the dirt, 400 meters from a man in a hole who did not know for another 11 seconds that the handle in his hands had stopped meaning anything. He found out when he twisted it. Nothing happened. He twisted it again. And then he came up out of the cleft to check the line, because that is what a man does, and he was in the open on broken rock at 480 meters with the sun behind him, and Iridi now calm had already cycled the bolt and was waiting for him. She did not fire. She watched him through the glass for 2 full seconds. He was maybe 25. He was holding the generator box in both hands like a school book and staring at the dead wire in the dirt with an expression she could see clearly at 480 meters. And it was the specific blank horror of a man watching the only thing he was good for stop working. "Take him," Deleuze said. "No. Sergeant, he's got nothing." Iridi's eye did not leave the scope. "The wire's cut. He's a man standing in the sun. He'll run." Then he runs. She keyed the handset instead. "Rampart, overwatch. The bridge is safe. The command wire is severed at the span. You have hostiles in the rocks 400 west of your position, and I have eyes on all of it. Move your wounded east. Now, go. They went. 9 men off a 200-meter span in 90 seconds, and Iridi Naucom covered them the whole way, and she put down 6 more men in the rocks on both flanks who tried to stop it, and one of those was a shot at 740 meters through a gap between 2 boulders that Delot called and did not believe. 28, Delot said when it stopped. Then after a moment, 28 confirmed, all day. Aubry, overwatch. Rampart element is off the span and consolidated east. Bridge is intact. Charge is on the 3rd pier, unfired. Command wire severed. Engagement complete. That was all she said about it. Nobody believed the wire. The report went up, and it came back down with a query on it, because a 2-millimeter command wire at 522 meters in failing light is not a thing that a staff sergeant does. It is a thing that a staff sergeant claims. A major in the operations shop wrote the word implausible in a margin. Word got around Aubry by the 2nd day that the wire had probably been cut by the blast, or shorted, or that the generator had simply failed, and that a small woman on a rock had gotten lucky and told a story about it. Denham Roscoe heard that in the mess hall on the 3rd morning. He was in line with a tray. Then the engineers came back from the Sarnac overpass with the charge and with the wire. They brought it in on a spool. 11 meters of copper strand recovered in 2 pieces from where it had fallen. They laid it out on a table in the operations tent, and a warrant officer named Ilyusha Panzarella Broch put a magnifier on the break, and about 15 people crowded in to look, and what was on that table was not a burn, and not a tear, and not a corroded parting. It was a clean transverse cut with a rolled lip on one side, the metal pushed and torn in a single direction, the exact signature of a projectile strike, and the direction of the roll pointed southeast, back across the wash, back to a shale bench 300 meters from nowhere. Panzarella Broch measured the bench-to-wire distance off the survey data twice because he did not trust it the first time. 522 meters, he said. Nobody in the tent said anything for a while. The major, who had written implausible, in the margin came in, looked at the spool through the magnifier for a long moment, and then went and found the file and wrote a different word and signed his name under it. And that was the closest thing to an apology a staff officer ever gives. Roscoe came to find her 4 days later on the west berm at dusk, where she was lying in the scree with a spotting scope and a notebook, writing numbers. He stood there for a while. She did not get up. "I've been trying to work out how to do this," he said. She waited. "I was good at this once. I'm still good. That's what I keep." He stopped. He put his hand over his mouth and took it away. "That's what I keep coming back to. I'm good at it. And I looked at you and I decided in about 4 seconds what you were, and then I spent 8 months making sure nobody had a reason to look any closer, because if somebody looked closer, then I'd have been the man who—" He stopped again. It took him a long time to start. "On that bridge." His voice went. He waited for it. "I had 9 men, and I had done everything right, and it didn't matter. And I was standing there working out which of them I could get off the deck first, and there wasn't an answer. There wasn't one. And I picked up the handset, and the only person in the world who could help me was the one I'd spent 8 months. He couldn't finish it. He stood in the scree with his hands at his sides, a big man, entirely undone. "I couldn't say your name," he said. "Do you know that? I got it out the second time. But the first time I couldn't say it, and it wasn't shame. It was I didn't think I had the right to. Iridi Nowcom sat up slowly and looked at him with her hands loose on her knees. "You had the right," she said. "You had it the whole time." He shook his head once, hard. "I'm sorry." It came out flat and small and completely without performance. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for 2 seconds. "Heard," she said. That was all. It was enough. Both of them knew it was enough. Beckman Osei found her the next morning outside the operations tent with a set of orders in his hand and did not make a ceremony of it. "I signed a roster 8 months ago without reading it," he said. "You paid for that, and 9 men nearly paid for it worse." He held out the folder. "You're taking over the marksmanship cell. Your own element, your own selection, your own training plan. Roscoe requested it in writing, and I'd already written it." "Yes, sir." "That's it?" "Yes, sir." He almost smiled. He didn't. Private Obadi Kranstetter found her a week later at the fuel point, working up the courage for most of an afternoon, and finally said it out loud with his ears going red. "Sergeant, Staff Sergeant Triggs, my cousin's husband." She turned around. "He's out of surgery. He's going home." Kranstetter's voice wobbled, and he pushed through it. "My cousin called my mother, and my mother called me, and she said he keeps telling everybody that a woman came down a mountain and told him he was getting on his boat in September, and he believed her, and that's why he's alive. That's what he tells people." He looked at the ground. "I used to watch you out on that berm, and I thought you were shooting at nothing." Iridi Nowcom looked at him for a moment. "Air," she said. "I told you." And then, because he deserved it, "Everything downrange is air, Kranstetter. The trick is knowing what it's doing." He grinned, like a kid at a fair. 3 weeks later, a new lieutenant at the marksmanship cell asked her, in front of 11 students, why she hadn't taken the man at the cleft when she had him cold at 480 meters. "He was disarmed," she said. "He was hostile. He was a man standing in the sun holding a box that didn't work." She racked a bolt and set the rifle down on the mat. "You can put a round anywhere you want. That's not the skill. The skill is knowing which one is the shot you have to take and which one is just the one you can." She looked down the line of them. "Anybody can be dangerous. Being dangerous is easy. Do the hard part." At 19:08 hours on a Thursday in October, on the same parade ground under the same white canvas awning, with 300 people in folding chairs, a different colonel read 18 names off a card and then read a 19th, and Staff Sergeant Iridi Nowcom stood up in the 9th row, 4th chair, and walked forward. 1,100 kilometers away, in a low room with a radio and a map, a commander who had spent 8 days planning the Sarnac overpass was still explaining to his own people how a prepared charge on a fixed span with a buried command element and 30 men in overwatch had failed to kill a single American, and he had run out of explanations on the second day, and had started, in the way of men who cannot account for something, to describe it as luck. Ansha Deleu sat in the second row with her hands folded, and did not correct anybody, because Iridi had asked her not to. And Iridi Nowcom took the folded certificate and shook the hand and turned around, and the wind came across the parade ground off the northern ridge, at the hour it always came, and she felt it on the back of her neck and knew the number without thinking about it, the way you know your own name. She walked back to her seat with her chin level and her hands loose at her sides. She sat down. She was still. She was